right. Welcome to State of Play on Mint Press News. We've recently returned from a week-long hiatus just in time to cover the U.S. presidential or the aftermath of the U.S. presidential election. So first, before we get started, let's take a moment of silence for our democracy. I'm just kidding. Was that a democracy? That whole thing that just happened? But don't worry. This is a constructive episode, but we're gonna have to do a trash talking autopsy first about both campaigns, which should be fun before we talk about action going forward, because the campaign autopsy will kind of inform what approaches we need to take. So, Donald J. Trump is president yet again. And before we start, here at Mint Press News, we are a small independent news room. We have no corporate funding, unlike the DNC, and we're demonetized on just about every platform. If you want to help us out and fund watchdog journalism and commentary and analysis, consider subscribing to Mint Press News' Patreon for $5 a month. It really goes a long way to keeping this ship running. And, we appreciate you if you're broke because we're in the last death throes of late stage finance capitalism and you can't swing it. We get it. We're just happy you're here. And if you drop a comment and a like and maybe subscribe, it does help us slang this into the algorithm to get it out to more people. Anyways, appreciate you. The Patreon plug is over with. It's my least favorite part of the show. So thanks for bearing with us and consider doing that. But in the meantime, as of about like an hour ago, Harris gave her concession speech, the gist of which was, we love you, which they don't. The ruling political class doesn't. And that unlike the Republican Party, unlike Trump, because their entire campaign was unlike Trump, we do this. Unlike Trump, they concede when they lose elections, which is fair. But she did have the former vice president, or the current vice president, the lame duck vice president, does have some words of encouragement for younger voters. And we're going to talk about it.
To the young people who are watching, it is okay to feel sad and disappointed. But please know it's going to be okay. On the campaign, I would often say, when we fight, we win. But here's the thing. Sometimes the fight takes a while. That doesn't mean we won't win.
Okay, so yeah, you can fight, and it doesn't mean the fight won't take a while, and it doesn't mean you won't win. If you ever expect the Democrats to win, all of this stuff is true and it can happen, but this episode is going to be about why it's not going to happen through the Democratic Party.
That doesn't mean we won't win. The important thing is don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. Don't ever stop trying to make the world a better place.
Oh man, it's rich hearing from a neoliberal warlord that's overseeing a genocide in part with another cabal of other warlords. But yeah, cool. Never stop trying to make the world a better place. I completely agree.
You have power. You have power.
And of course, the Democrats will never talk about where that power originates from, like something like the working class, because that's not what they're actually about.
To the young people who are watching, it is...
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah, we're definitely not gonna watch that one again. So she conceded, and my first response, and I'm just gonna play this because I would like to make some addendums to it, was essentially this. My main platform is military analysis and geopolitical analysis. So one of the central things I talk about is Palestine. So we're going to talk about some some Democratic reactions post Harris not winning last night. It's important to talk about because we're going to have to analyze these movements and these social trends if we're going to work to actions going forward. So here we go. Expected post-Trump election, the liberal brain rot comments are coming in hot. I'm so confused. It's like you guys got what you wanted. Nobody wanted a Trump presidency. The GOP literally controls all branches of government, and we're fucked. Anyways, moving on. Now, when he gives the green light for Netanyahu to finish Gaza once and for all, then what? Netanyahu already has the green light to finish Gaza and recolonize it. What are you talking about? Just because the Biden administration uses different language, different public language to the Trump administration? Grow up. Can't wait to see how this benefits the Palestinians. It won't. However, you guys proved your point. What point? What point do you think was being proved? I guess if a point was proved, it was Democrats will literally blame everybody but themselves for their own mistakes. And then some smart boy says, but Jill Stein got 0.4% nationally. That's progress, right? Yeah, dude. Jill Stein got 0.4%. Sorry, I was riffing. 4% nationally. So what explains the massive Trump victory? It wasn't like 5 million. I think 5 million votes is what it's up to. It wasn't even a hair. It wasn't even a close call. It was a straight up victory. But you're going to blame that on 4% of the vote? If 0.4. If anything, Harris lost because of deep-seated misogyny and white supremacy. That is reductive. We're going to get into what this actually means. We're going to talk about voter base, how it's going to gender and education differentials, and yeah, still misogyny and white supremacy and all that. In this country, being a fucking cop and a genocidal warlord didn't help, but again, most liberals don't even care about those issues, and a lot of independent voters don't care about those issues. What the Democrats could have done is actually have a primary, since history shows that vice presidents from sitting unpopular administrations don't win. And of course, being an actual center-left party would have also been helpful instead of going right. It seems like the closing argument of campaigning with Liz Cheney and promising MAGA Republicans on a Democratic cabinet probably wasn't the play. Also, imperialism's becoming less popular with the younger generation. So yeah, alienate the progressive left and try to be a Republican light, but who's going to vote for a Republican light that has an actual Republican to vote for? And Democrats, the DNC, the delegates, the donor class that props up the party will always block and resist any progressive movement to the left because #capitalism. So expect Democrats to always go further to the right, and y'all will continue to accept right-wing policies because at least they're not, quote, Republicans. But again, please stop blaming the left, Arab and Muslim voters, anti-genocide voters, black men, pro-Palestine radicals, because again, it was mostly y'all not paying attention to what's going on in the masses, being a bunch of smug liberal assholes getting hyped up on Beyonce and Taylor Swift and literally doing nothing. You're not boycotting shit, you're not protesting shit, you're not demanding anything from your candidates. Great demonstration of how fascism is allowed to happen and flourish. I voted for Harris. Genocide is not ideal, but groceries could be cheaper. Boom! 1930s Germany. So blame everybody but yourselves. And honestly, I think going forward, it's going to be easier to work with and bring over disaffected former MAGA Republicans and libertarians than it will be liberals. So we're all still learning. We'll see. The next 4 years are going to be horrible, and hopefully we have another election. Oh, and one final thought. Have y'all noticed the vindictive glee of some of these liberals saying essentially, yeah, now that Trump's presidency, you guys are going to really see how bad things are going to get for the Palestinians. Yeah, you did this. Yeah, a lot of vitriol on Twitter, and there's some things I would like to amend from my initial comment, but we're actually going to get into this from an analytical perspective. So Donald J. Trump, as you know, is the president yet again. And while the focus might shift towards the future, the only rational response to Trump's victory is radical action. Any sane response. An autopsy of the Harris campaign's failures can provide valuable insights into the course forward. And the DNC and Harris campaign relied heavily on appeals to figures like former Vice President Dick Cheney and adopting positions that aligned with neoconservatives and promising a bipartisan cabinet which included Republicans. They commended strict border policies and spotlighted Harris's prosecutorial record, a stance that alienated many voters. Her campaign, which some younger critics dismissed as mostly vibes, counted on women rallying to protect abortion rights. Yet Harris offered little beyond a vague return to the flawed and unreliable framework of Roe v. Wade. Harris was inextricably attached to and a vocal proponent of the Biden administration's support for Israel's genocide in Gaza, failing to distance herself ideologically from prominent Zionists like Biden and Donald Trump. President Biden's most recognizable achievements revolved around union support and organized labor, but these kind of surprisingly were not a focus of the Harris campaign. Instead, the Democrats promoted an economic plan friendly to corporate interests, very like Wall Street, very Silicon Valley friendly, offering little concrete support for the middle class beyond flowery language about like opportunity and our children's future. So many Democrats are blaming the Palestine solidarity movement for Harris's loss, but the data does not support this accusation as the cause for such a divisive Trump victory. All right. Harris, a deeply uninspiring and problematic candidate, failed to drive voter turnout in the way Biden did in 2020. We may never have a reliable data set on how many voters simply abstained, disillusioned by the choice between two unappealing candidates, but this perspective undoubtedly influenced the election. So the Harris campaign quite simply moved too far to the right, alienating parts of its base that are committed to progressive left-wing policies. So many others grew apathetic, watching the Democratic Party, and a party often seen as centrist, adopt conservative positions to appeal to disaffected white conservative voters and independents. So the logic for the DNC, it appears, was to draw in these conservative-leaning voters as a means of holding back the far right. But this approach is likely to fail. Republican light will never beat Republican actual, especially since the electoral system itself favors Republicans. This misstep has been a disaster in realpolitik for the DNC. One could argue that the Democrats' inability or unwillingness to embrace progressive platforms has had lasting consequences, harming America's most vulnerable communities and intensifying struggles for those in the global South who endure the impacts of U.S. imperialism on a daily basis. The salient question remains, therefore, will Democrats learn from these mistakes and losses? History, in that regard, looks bleak. Establishment Democrats have already started to blame the left for their poor and alienating decisions with surprising bile. Quote, "I hope you are happy. Just look at what Trump will do to Gaza now," unquote, is a common refrain. So the Palestine solidarity movement is an easy scapegoat, but again, it's not reflected in the data on why the Democrats lost. So on this episode of State of Play, as I previously stated, we will discuss how the Democratic Party cannot save us. So how do we save ourselves? Well, let's take a look from a post-election video from a third-party candidate on some other alternative ideas of looking at this problem.
Trump resoundingly won both the popular vote and the electoral college. And Trump's agenda is clearly hateful, it is dangerous, and will have significant impact on working class people. So they are definitely not the ones to lead us. But let's be clear, the Democrats are responsible for losing and have no one else to blame but themselves. This is not the collapse of Harris, but of the Democratic Party's agenda. A collapse of the neoliberal, pro-war, pro-corporate politics that does not offer solutions to working class people. Ever since Bernie Sanders, the party has crushed all proposals to support progressive movements and workers and poor people in this country. The Democratic Party has abandoned and betrayed the working class. And as expected, the working class has abandoned the Democratic Party. We can't blame the people. We must blame the ones who have the economic and political power to change things and have chosen not to respond to people's needs.
All right, yeah. So this is a great point, and it's reflected in Vice President Harris's concession speech earlier. No Democratic candidate that is groomed and put forward by the DNC will make any of these points, right? Just keep that in mind. There will be no mention of the working class. There will be no mention of class of any kind. They'll just say Americans. They'll threaten Trump and Republicans trying to take away your rights, but they will never, ever, ever mention class. The Republicans do it, but they don't know what socialism is, and they don't even know what capitalism is, and why they're struggling. But at least they do have a discussion about it.
That's what this is about. The results of this election does not mean people have become more racist or more fascist. It means that Democrats have failed at fighting for or defending the people. It's been a period of stagnant wages, no real relief on childcare or rent or food prices, broken promises from 2020, setting high expectations and then failing to deliver. There are consequences for all of that. That will require our political clarity, our courage, and the determination to fight and win. Only the people will save the people. And we need to build our own movement of working class people. We need to build our own independent political organization by and for the working class that's ready to take power. That is why we invite you.
All right. So yeah, we're not doing, you can join the PSL if you'd like. We are not doing political endorsements on this, but that was a pretty solid concession speech. And we're going to talk about what building these alternate power structures and organizations and how you can get involved later on in the episode. So now, first of all, there is this notion that Harris lost because of the genocide in Gaza and the potential expansion of regional war into potentially worst case scenario nuclear war that the Biden administration is overseeing. The war in Ukraine is increasingly unpopular. They're spending a lot of money on the war in Ukraine, and it's not looking too hot. It's actually looking friggin' horrible right now. Harris would continue to support that. Trump says he'll resolve it in like a month or before he's even president. He won't, but there is a seeming desire, and we'll see if he can compete with neoliberal interests to stop the war in Ukraine. I don't know, it's something he might do, but then again, it's hard to interpret what his foreign policy is because he's so erratic. He's also said that last week that he told Netanyahu he has before January 6th to stop the fighting in Gaza. Again, erratic, can't trust anything he says. So he's kind of like a loose cannon. Now, when it comes to, the Arab vote, we should look at some of the voices here and what they think about Trump in power.
I'm dunk for Kamala Harris, right? All she had to do was engage with our community, humanize us, discuss an arms embargo, meet with uncommitted, gave us a Palestinian speaker, and put forth a policy to end this horrific genocide in Gaza and this horrific war that's now spilling over into South Lebanon, that is now going to put the United States security apparatus in a tough position to try to fend off a broader regional war. Kamala Harris has engaged in Cheneyism, as we call it. She's touted endorsements from Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney, and both of them were the architects of the war in Iraq and many of those neoconservative policies I talked about. So Trump is really able to hit on those weaknesses with this very broad and diverse Arab and Muslim community here. And they're somewhat gravitating towards his message. Some are very hesitant to embrace it because of the Muslim ban. But the reason why you're starting to see increased support for Trump is not only because he's going after Kamala Harris's policies and kind of embracing Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney, it's also because it seems that Trump, whether it be for his own reasons or because maybe he cares, but probably not, he's more willing.
Yeah, he doesn't care. He absolutely does not care.
To meet with Arab Americans. He was just here at the Great Commoner. He was in Hamtramck. He met with Mayor Ahmed Khalib. He's talking to him about family values, which is something that Arab Americans in the city care about. He's talking to him about ending the war in the Middle East very broadly. He doesn't really have any idea how to, obviously, which is a significant problem, but that's what the community wants to hear. And Kamala Harris has not allowed for that to happen.
And in fact, a lot of data sets show that if she had promised an arms embargo, I mean, she didn't have to actually do it on Israel, and she wouldn't do it, but all she had to do was talk about it. Her chances of winning would have gone up. So
She has given Donald Trump this opening, I believe, to engage with our community and maybe even manipulate them. And it's very clear that the Democratic Party of today does not want to engage with Arab and Muslim voters. They see us as a political problem.
Exactly. Arab and Muslim voters are a political problem for the Democrats, which are a warlike imperialist party that will always vote for Middle East interventionism.
And they don't want us to be a part of the equation. I'll say this. The Democratic Party often portrays itself as this big tent, egalitarian, ever diverse party. Well, they may believe that, but they've also sent the message that Arab and Muslim Americans aren't welcome.
Yeah, and again, I think that the Democrats got swept, not just also in the Senate and the presidential election, because of a lot of different issues. Financial issues, disenchantment with neoliberal financial policies, like the current state of the economy, which doesn't necessarily have to do with Biden. But yeah, it's not just the war. It's a lot of other things. But of course, you will always expect liberal mainstream media to completely draw the wrong conclusions about why Harris lost.
Ads just beat her to death on tying her to the economy, tying her to Biden.
Of course, she's tied to Biden. Like, she's literally the vice president for the Biden administration. Furthermore, they definitely should bring up that there's not really a good historical precedent for a VP from an unpopular administration winning the presidency.
Tying her to weird stuff. Yeah. And so there was really never a great response. And then to your point, the ad that came out that was beating Kamala up around fear about Israel not being protected, there was
oh my God,
never a response from the campaign on that, which I thought was a big mistake.
She said she would support Israel unconditionally. Good job, CNN. Excellent pundits, as always.
Amanda Berman from Zioness had to raise money running her own ads trying to fight back alone. That didn't work. So, but listen, you tied her to the economy, you tied her to Biden, you tied her to weird, and it was not a good
I agree with everything you're saying.
Okay, so this of course was the problem from the get-go. The fact that there wasn't a primary, that there was no other candidates that that couldn't be connected to, I don't really think Biden had too much to do with the failing economy. There might be some disagreement there, but she was tied to a genocide. She was tied to an increasingly unpopular war in Ukraine. She was tied to the Democrats' failure, even though this is more complicated than that, but we're not going to get into American civics, the repealing of like Roe v. Wade. And so she was tied to the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which is now a Republican talking point and used to attack Joe Biden. She was just a deeply problematic candidate from the get-go. But she raised a lot of money. And because people and the Democrats are so disconnected from what the average American thinks outside of the coastal areas, even in the coastal areas, that they didn't see what the problem was, because they generally live in a bubble where they go to, choreographed mass spectacles like the DNC, and they listen to Little John music and hype each other up, but they don't see changing trends. I think it was Hillary, where identity politics and race politics really got into it. And it started because of, in 2016, her opposition to Bernie Sanders, who was talking about really universal issues, like class issues, working people issues that were universal to not just white people or black people. It was a class thing. And then Hillary's campaign, if you recall correctly, started taking on these niche, more race-based issues. And that's kind of what we're seeing. And that's kind of what the tack the Harris campaign took, or more like the Harris supporters and the the paid influencers that were getting money and payouts from DNC cutouts for basically pushing this narrative. And so they totally missed the changing dynamics within the voter base of this country. And this is what we have to keep in mind when we talk about how to agitate, educate, and organize. It's now like a gender gap, and it's an education gap. Okay. So I don't like the Wall Street Journal. Okay. I don't think anyone here does, but they did an interesting piece 2 weeks ago, and it's reductive, and I'm going to supplement it with some stuff because they don't talk about podcast bro culture, which is incredibly influential with young men, especially young white men. But we're going to play this, and I'm going to add additional commentary because this is the main blind spot that the DNC had that we can't have going forward.
2008, 58% of young people leaned Democratic. 2012, 53%. And in the last two major election years, that percentage held steady at 55%. But in 2023, that number dipped below 50% for the first time since 2005. And you'll notice right here, they've started to lean more Republican. And that's partly because of one specific group, young men.
Sorry, I just saw something in the comments. I'm Swedish. What's the GOP again? I recognize it. The GOP is the Republican Party. It stands for the Grand Old Party. So yeah, we still call it the GOP. GOP, the Republicans, same thing.
Young men have increased their support of the Republican Party from 35% to 48%, a 13 percentage point increase in just 7 years. And this is a new trend. While 2020 exit polls show that young men backed Biden by 15 percentage points, a February 2024 Wall Street Journal poll found they favored Trump by 14 percentage points. And this loss of young male voters is a major issue for the Democratic Party going into November. The question now, can Kamala Harris bring some back?
So this is why so many social media influencers, like what's that one account, Femme and Fabulous? She was going to all these Harris rallies, talking about how hot men were that were voting for Harris, like how hot straight white men were for voting for Harris. It's obviously, a DNC attempt to like get these male voters back and make them feel empowered with women, but it's not going to work. Okay. And it didn't work. So we're going to get into that in a bit.
Here's what's driving young men to support Republicans and what it could mean for the presidential election to come.
America great again. When we ask young voters, what issue is most important to you when you go to cast a vote? Among young men, it's the economy. Among young women, it's abortion.
17% of men say the economy is the most important issue, followed by democracy and immigration. Whereas for young women, the top issue is abortion, by a lot.
Why is this happening? Well, we put the reasons into two different buckets. One is the life experiences that young men and young women are having. Those life experiences are diverging.
Young men without a college degree have seen the greatest decline in labor force participation. Meanwhile, a record 87% of college-educated women are in the workforce.
We're about to get into podcast bro territory, so hold on to your butts.
And today, women make up 60% of college graduates.
This division that we're seeing between young men and young women, it goes beyond who they're going to vote for Congress or president. It goes to a range of policy issues. So then let's look at what the government is offering. The Biden administration has moved to forgive federally funded student loans. That affects young women more than young men.
During the 2019-2020 school year, 49% of female undergraduate students took out loans, compared to only 42% of male undergraduates. And 66% of all student debt is carried by women.
The young women favored forgiving student loans by 45 percentage points. The young men were about equally divided. I mean, that's a big difference.
Meanwhile, young men support extending Trump's tax cuts by 23 percentage points, which cut the corporate tax rate and reduced some individual income tax.
And now, because...
Oh, Wall Street Journal. It also had many other effects as well. But you guys are cute. That's beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. So we're just going to keep blowing past that one.
Of our tax cuts, you can keep more of your hard-earned money.
But women oppose the proposed extension by 20 percentage points, a full 43-point difference.
That's data that goes like this. Young men headed in one direction and young women in the other. That's a big difference. Data does not usually segment young voters that remarkably. This is something new.
Which brings us back to...
Well, real quick, the data isn't just fluid. We were talking about an education and a gender divide. And I see in your comments, like a lot of you guys, because you're savvy, know that the incel stuff is coming. Yeah, it's coming because it has to do with economics, culture, dating culture, podcast bro culture, and it can't be dismissed. And of course, the Wall Street Journal is not going to talk about it, but it's a huge cultural force. Joe Rogan, Logan Paul, like all these things that young, white, not just white, Hispanic men listen to. Yeah.
22% of young female voters say abortion is their number one issue in this election, a key aspect of Harris's campaign.
We trust women to make decisions about their own body.
Only 3% of young male voters said the same. And young men and women stacked up differently on other issues as well. With immigration, Trump's policies are much more likely to be supported by men than women. Men support deploying troops at the border by 10 percentage points, whereas women oppose this policy by 15 points. And when it comes to building the wall, one of Trump's key immigration policies, men are only slightly leaning towards opposition, but women overwhelmingly oppose it. These gaps are hard to explain just by differences in lived experience, which brings us to the second thing that explains the gap between young men and women.
What are the candidates and what are the parties saying to young voters? Donald Trump and the Republican Party are putting out a lot of messages expressly intended to appeal to young men. Donald Trump has gone to Ultimate Fighting Championship matches. He recently appeared on the podcast of Logan Paul. He went to a sneaker convention to sell his own brand of sneakers.
Horrendous sneakers. I think this was his very, I would say, kind of racist attempt to appeal to non-white voters. But I mean, we're not going to get into that. He has some really problematic clips from from last year about his gold sneakers. We're just going to sweep that under the rug and move on.
Get young people out to vote.
These are audiences that are overwhelmingly male and overwhelmingly filled with young men. And it's a way that Donald Trump and his campaign have been saying, hey, young men, I'm with you. I'm on the same page as you. I understand you.
Meanwhile,
a lot of the messaging from the Democratic Party has been towards issues that are more salient for women.
When I am President of the United States, I will sign into law the protections for reproductive freedom.
So what does this mean for November? Young women historically vote at higher rates than young men. But experts say that with a tight election, the Democratic Party will need to draw in as many votes as possible. The next challenge for the Republican Party will be figuring out how to turn these young male supporters into actual voters.
Well, it didn't really work. It didn't work at all. And the crux of a lot of these. Okay, first of all, most guys suck. I get it. They're not going to care about like women's rights. They're going to feel really insecure, and we could like whine all day about how modern culture doesn't support men. It's not something I particularly respect, but you still have to acknowledge that it's a massive political force that had huge repercussions for this election. So, yeah. So, oh hey. One sec. Again, men don't understand women's health, so it's too abstract for people who have made a life of weaponized incompetence. I can't clean, I can't do anything, so you're just gonna have to do it for me, mom. And that goes into that goes into like later life adult relationships as well. But again, weaponized incompetence is beyond the scope of this. Basically, one aspect I wanted to bring to the attention about like this whole podcast bro culture, and we're not going to get into incel stuff, but the economic divide and the gender divide is interesting. There's been, I'd say since like the 2014s, it's got real bad where there's this idea of like men feeling disempowered and like you need to like make a certain amount of money in order to like, date women. And, that means that women have certain expectations of men that, are, financially linked, and that goes into the whole, like women are a certain way. And it's this completely like toxic feedback cycle, but it's definitely plugged into the economy. It's like, well, I can't get a job. I can't ever do this. Like, I'm never going to be worthy. I'm going to be like an insecure dude this whole time, and I'm going to go incel and blah, blah, blah. We're not going to do an anthropological deep dive on it. But when Trump goes into the podcast world, where millions upon millions upon millions of guys who don't normally vote will vote for a guy who promises to have money, and that feeds back into like all these insecurities and stuff. The whole male loneliness epidemic. And yeah, and I don't really agree with this take in every single way, but it's significant because I do agree with when they do the autopsy of this, they're going to have to look at the male voter base and how to recruit them in the future, which brings the question: how do we recruit these insecure men? This is something we're going to have to workshop because I don't think the Democrats will ever be able to get them. And if we're trying to build a movement, like this is I believe this is a significant base.
Supposed to be an election about women's rights. And I wouldn't be surprised if post-election kind of autopsy here is that actually what won or lost this election was which campaign put forward a more aspirational vision of masculinity. So you have, I think, what is some of the few real swing voters is young men. They're actually less conservative than a lot of the polls. They're about on par with young women in terms of their support for gender equality.
I don't know where he's getting this polling data, but let's keep going.
The issue is they don't feel seen by the Democratic Party. On the right, they have kind of the Hulk Hogan or really Elon Musk sort of toughness, innovation, and strength, or an attempt to portray that as kind of manhood. Sometimes I think it backfires. I think it comes across a little bit coarse and cruel sometimes. And on the left, you have with Walz, Michelle Obama, an attempt to call on young.
Yes, I see. It's not about men, but if you're looking at the gender gap when it comes to voting, like you can't not talk about this.
Men's instincts around service and protection. But unfortunately, I think sometimes young men see the far left as telling them they should just act more like a woman. If you go onto the DNC.org website, it explicitly says who we serve, and it lists 16 demographic groups from Asian Pacific Islanders to veterans to the disabled to seniors. It accounts for about 76% of the population, but it doesn't mention anywhere young men. And when you explicitly say you're advantaging 76% of the population,
okay, so I'm sorry, guys, that was difficult to listen to. This guy, the Professor Galloway guy, is a clown. And I obviously, white people, and I talked about this at the beginning of the episode, misogyny, white supremacy baked into all these cultural institutions and social fabrics, especially when it comes to conservative values. You're never going to get them. And of course, you're never going to have a lot of people, not just white men, but Hispanic men, vote for Harris. That's just something that, in terms of realpolitik, you have to recognize. But this whole like male loneliness epidemic, which is something I don't even want to have to talk about, but we have to. It's because there is a massive, huge data set that says like this is the weakest point for like people like on the left. We're having a generation like over 50% going to the right because of these issues. Wait, this is an interesting comment. I'm kind of a tanky, kind of a libertarian. The two are not mutually exclusive. Instead of asking people to conform to a party should conform to the constituents. That's a big issue. So yeah, I think that the Democratic Party for this last election had a very narrow vision. So, maybe I'm looking at more of these comments. Maybe lonely men should read books and make friends by actually having original thoughts for once. Have you met most men? They need to be led. And so, we're going to have to work with that demographic and find a solution. And in some ways, I do believe I've definitely had more success, and maybe that's because of like who I am and what I look like, talking and getting disaffected MAGA people and someone just said like libertarian and tanky isn't mutually exclusive. I'd be curious on how that philosophy works. But yeah, just finding ways to get them over. And so I think moving forward, what demographics do we target? Like, because the three elements of social change are what? Agitation. You agitate people into wondering why a problem, and education, educating them after they become curious, or forcing them to hear it and think about it, and then organizations. We do need more than two parties. Yeah, and we all have a role when it comes to outreach. If I'm going to, I'm probably not the right person to, when we try to think about education going forward, I'm definitely not the right person in many cases to like approach, I don't know, people of color about like coming on side, because of the obvious problematics. You have like issues with like privilege and other things like that. But disaffected men, specifically white men, that's something I could personally do. So when you think about going forward and building the movement, an important part to talk about is like thing to think about and consider is like, who can you approach to bring on side? Who could you talk to? Who would you want to talk to? I get away with talking to conservatives because obviously I'm a white dude and I was also in the military. So think about like who you can do outreach to. So let's actually start talking about practical purposes. According to incel vote, it's going to suck, but there are inroads. There are a lot of guys who are against the wars and against what's happening in Palestine. It's not necessarily coming from a leftist place. Some of it might be coming from a racist place. So now there was a good article in The Intercept published this morning. I'm just going to pull it up real quick because it makes some interesting points. All right. So first of all, the most powerful, like now everyone's thinking like, oh my God, now that Trump's elected, we're all screwed. Well, first of all, let's take some things into context. All right. The most powerful social movements of the last decades did not primarily build on support from Democratic leadership under Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, or Joe Biden. Check, check, check. Nor did they collapse during Trump's first tenure. And guess what, guys? He's not going to be president until January. So cool. 2 months to start getting people serious about this. So there's no one way to plug today's interconnected struggles. I mean, this is something we've talked about a lot because of empire, the nature of empire and the imperial boomerang, etc. The Palestine Solidarity Movement, which also challenges U.S. hegemony and colonial power structures, is rich terrain for culture workers, researchers, etc. Those on the front lines ensuring continued access to abortions and trans healthcare are always in need of greater support. If you're a tenant, you could join or organize a tenants union. If you're a worker, even precariously employed, there's always room to join or build upon unionization and organization efforts. So mutual aid groups abound in every city. Local governments nationwide are building cop cities that are in need of fierce opposition. As someone in the Palestine Liberation Solidarity Movement and an anti-war veteran, I always am communicating with and seeing Stop Cop City people because the overlap is so extreme. And then, of course, the Stop Cop City people are protesting against not just the cop cities, but the carceral system, which is informed by what's happening in Palestine. We've talked about the imperial boomerang, how technology and spyware and techniques and procedures used and tested on Palestinians to enforce apartheid and occupation and now genocide in West Bank and Gaza is used on our own people and is used in our own carceral systems, the prison systems. So it's all interconnected. So I think, well, we know the way to go forward is like activists mobilize around movements, and movements are seen separately by a lot of people like Stop Cop City, a tenants union, the Palestine Solidarity Movement. They're all seen as different movements, but they're all part of the same imperial system. So activists mobilize around issues, and revolutionaries organize around systems, the entire system. So it's all interconnected. And a lot of people aren't going to know like what mutual aid looks like, community defense looks like. And we don't have time to get into that right now. But what I would encourage you to do is not just do Palestine solidarity stuff. There are other things to get involved in, and they're all connected. And we need to start connecting everything. And this is going to take a friggin' long time. Yeah. And one more thing about the incels, Katie Cans, like in other words, can't. Like, yeah. So, yeah. So we're not starting from scratch, right? Like this is not coming out of nowhere, the Trump presidency. There are systems in place from BLM, from what we've been working with Stop Cop City, with the Palestine movement, with all of this stuff. So we might do a whole series of education on what each one of these things looks like in terms of like mutual aid, because a lot of people are new to this, like how to plan and organize actions, community defense, what that even looks like. You're like, oh my God, what does community defense looks like? It's kind of scary concept. I mean, yeah, the state is kind of scary. So we will definitely get into that. But in the meantime, like what we can start doing right now is intersectional work. All right. Not just Palestine stuff. There's a lot of other things you can get involved in, and you will learn about what all this looks like. And this is not something that you need to freak out on and like get involved with overnight, and get all stuck into in multiple different ways. No, you just start showing up and evaluate where you want to go and what you want to do. And again, we're not starting from scratch. So again, one point before the Q&A is figure out what you're willing to do and comfortable doing it. Obviously, getting out of your comfort zone and exploring new things to get involved with and learn about would be awesome. And again, education going forward, like putting yourself out there in your own social sphere and educating people, getting people on the level. Think about who you can talk to. Different people can talk to different people, or certain types of people that other people will have difficulty accessing. So, yeah. Now we're going to get into the Q&A, and we can. This will kind of guide me on what we want to talk about. So, can you please explain what you meant by the Palestine movement not being a factor in Harris losing? I'm sorry. I'm pretty sure I said it wasn't the factor. There are many factors in Harris losing. But I was just seeing on social media, it was like she lost because of, her stance on Gaza. I think it's more complicated than that. I think it has to do with her being attached to the Biden administration, which is deeply unpopular, and that it presupposes something that I don't personally believe, which is that Gaza or genocide happening overseas in the Middle East is a deal breaker for most Americans. It's clearly not. And the people that abstained from voting and the people who voted third party, specifically against genocide in Palestine, doesn't account for the large Trump upset. So it's not it's a factor. It's not the factor, though. That's all I wanted to say. I just got money asking me for more money to get House votes. Yes, I think the House election is still going on. We don't know who all our congressmen are yet, but they have the White House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, and they're probably going to get Congress. So we're going to have like a Republican supermajority, and it's going to totally suck. You have to court the incel vote to win electoral math. Yeah. I think, as Claudia Carina was saying, we're gonna have to do that by ourselves. So don't worry. I'm not sure you could. I'll do my best to court disaffected white men. I could probably get some Hispanic men on the level too, but God help us all. So, do you lift, bro? Yeah, and I'll start lifting more so I can court the gym bro frigging support. So, Dems had the chance to ratify abortion when Obama was in office. Yes, they had a supermajority. 2007, he said that was going to make, when he was campaigning, that was going to be like his top legislative priority. Then a year after being in office, he said it was no longer a top legislation priority. And then it never happened. Wonder why? Because without abortion, there would be a strong man party. Without weaponizing women's rights, and by extension, LGBTQ plus rights and everything like that, they really wouldn't have any way to compete substantially with Republicans, especially since the Electoral College is already slanted towards Republicans because, the roots predicted its destiny. The Electoral College was meant to disenfranchise, enfranchise and protect slaveholders and stuff like that. But we're not going to get into that. So, yeah, someone came into my comment section earlier when I was like, Harris refuses to go on Joe Rogan. That was stupid. Democrats love to lose. And then someone came into my comments and was like, she won on SNL that has like 1 million X viewer base. What are you talking about? She doesn't need to go on that fascist podcast. I was like, yeah, I mean, she should have. And guess what? Just because she went on SNL, guess what? Everybody who watches Saturday Night Live was already voting for Harris. Okay? The New York coastal elite was already voting for Harris. Okay? First felon elected as president. This is another thing that we have to consider about like the carceral system and the imperial boomerang. So many men, and now I'm sure women too, are disenfranchised by the monstrous carceral and police and prison system that is in America, that they identify more with a felon than they do with a prosecutor. So this was another freaking blind spot that, of course, the liberal Democratic elite wouldn't ever think about. They're like, oh yes, law and order, good. Except they wield the boot, which is the police force, and they're not getting hit with a heel, which is like the everyday working class American. So yeah, a lot of people are identifying more with felons because of our carceral system and police state. So all you supporting feminism, learn who Gloria Steinem was, a CIA operative hell-bent on destroying the family unit and pushing stayism. Not sure about she was a CIA operative, but she was more about making feminism not talk about class at all. So just keeping feminism and class consciousness separate. The D Party ignores its voter base and D progressives. They run core establishment candidates in spite of overwhelming support for populist candidates. Our party runs their populist candidate. Yep, that's true. That's a good point. And again, we've had veteran Democratic operatives say categorically that Biden wasn't chosen because he was the only person who could defeat Trump. He was chosen because he was the only person who could defeat Bernie. The U.S. is politically illiterate by design. So I think many just say F the establishment and vote Trump. Yeah, they do that. But Trump might not be the establishment. He says he's going to drain the swamp. But he is the swamp. He's literally surrounded by swamp creatures like Mike Pompeo. So when you approach people from a place of seeking to advance common interests, the race doesn't matter. The new left was always co-opted by oligarchs to keep young leftists away from true Marxism. The new left was always co-opted I'd say they started to destroy the left after Vietnam because it was effective. So that's a whole different thing, though. During the Vietnam backlash, cop cities almost all started under Democratic governments. Yep. Let's see. Here's a perfect question. I don't know how to build community. For real, where do I even look? It's easier in a city. Okay. Well, hang on. Activism community that like engages in stuff like community defense and mutual aid and education. Um, that's easy to do if you and you will probably be able to find this and you can like post about it on social media. In your city or hometown, there are probably activist people and they're not going to turn you away and you're going to learn all about it. And of course, we can do an episode on that in the future. I'd probably do it on my own platform, which is Colonial Outcast, because it's more suited to talking about that kind of stuff than this news show. But yes, getting involved, finding out where the events are, reaching out to organizers is usually on Facebook. There's Instagram accounts. You can post in the comment section being like, how do I get involved? And yes, someone will definitely help you out. That's where you get involved. And that's where you get, into the community. So that's where you look. Social media is great for this. Okay, I'm not completely sure if these statistics are correct, but I think they're close. 74% of white men and 69% of white women voted for Trump. Greatest support for Trump when compared to other demographics. I've seen other polls but other data sets where they weren't as high. But yes, the majority of both white men and white women voted for Trump. So, yep. Yes, we need a whole new political system. I agree. We should start building it adjacent to the one that already exists right now. So, yeah, and this goes to my point. Also, using a felon as a pejorative is so fucking alienating to so many disenfranchised people, which is why a lot of people, as I said before, are gravitating more towards the felon than the prosecutor because of our disenfranchising system. Would you please explain why the Jill Stein vote count was so low, even though we voted third party for the first time? I'd be interested in your thoughts. I don't think that many people were that engaged. I think a lot of people were going to vote Jill Stein, and they said they were planning on it, but it was a record number of votes for Jill. It wasn't that low, to be fair, but it was a record number of votes. It wasn't anywhere near the 5% that they were hoping for. There was no chance they were going to get 5% of the vote. But you voting third party for the first time was a great step, and you should totally keep that going. So people stayed home. As I said earlier in the episode, like they weren't interested in participating in a system that's so hopeless and broken. So no one's going to save us but us. Yeah, guys. So can you please say more about building a different political system adjacent to the existing one? Well, it starts as grassroots community stuff. And it starts with, being part of actions and getting involved in aid and defense. And you will build a political system, which in my experience is kind of like more anarchist than anything. But again, we will get into this. I friggin' promise. But in the meantime, this is a unique opportunity, especially as people become disenfranchised with the Harris loss, also disenfranchised with the inevitable failures of the Trump presidency, to bring more people on. People are going to get really scared, and that's going to be a really good opportunity to choose who you can talk to and start the education process, because no one's going to save us but us. And Americans have been made to be intentionally ignorant of these things because it doesn't serve, well, I would say democracy, but, capitalism, to have an educated proletariat. So, guys, this sucks. It's going to get worse. We'll see you next week. All right. Cheers, y'all.